Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. A little while ago I made a video called 10 Signs Your Mental Illness is Made Up for Attention. It was a response, hence the quotation marks, a response to a really horrible article I read where someone thought they had all the signs of a faker and that using their method you could spot who was faking their mental illness. So I called bullshit on that, and I've had a lot of views on that video, which is wonderful. At the moment it's on 298,014 views. Thank you very much. That's unexpected. I appreciate that. But I've had a couple of recurring comments in the comments section that I wanted to address in video form, because I think that it's better to do it like that because more people see it rather than, you know, getting involved in stuff in the comments section. Also, I didn't want to challenge these people individually because I think you can reach more people by making a video like this. And also, I don't want to start drama. I don't want to start, you know, attacking people for what they're saying in the comments section. It's just I want to attack the broader idea behind what they're saying, so I don't want to get at them personally. So, before we begin, I should say that I'm not an expert in terms of having gone to university and studied mental illness and psychology and that kind of thing, but I am what you might call an expert by experience. I have mental illness issues, I have generalised anxiety disorder, I've suffered on and off from depression, and also I have BPD. So I do suffer with mental illness, I've lived with this for a very long time. So in that sense, I'm a bit of an expert on it, but if you're expecting like a doctor or a psychologist or something, that's not me. I'm putting that out there straight away. But I will say that I think the input of those that have gone through the system, that do know what it's like, that do suffer with it, I think that that's just as valuable and sometimes maybe even a little bit more valuable than that of doctors and psychologists. That's not me trying to put doctors and psychologists down, because there are some fantastic ones. I've worked with some myself and obviously they know what they're talking about, but I also think it's important to look at the other angle, which is what it's like to be a sufferer and what it's like to feel that way. And I think both of those perspectives work together and can create a much better picture of mental health. Okay, so point number one I received. People do fake mental illness though. Yeah, I put my hands up, I'm sure they do, but that's not what my video was about. The article, I don't really want to link the article in this video again because every time someone clicks on it, I think the writer gets some money from it, but if you want to see it, you know, it's your choice, you can see it again. The article was trying to point out different ways in which you could spot a faker, someone who's faking mental illness, and I think that those points were absolutely ludicrous because on that list, it's pretty much a list of symptoms displayed by actual mentally ill people. So it was absolutely ludicrous that this was a list of signs of fakers. This misinformation is dangerous and harmful to those that are mentally ill. And think about it for a second, how do you think it feels to see a list of your symptoms as someone who struggles with a mental illness, and it is a battle you fight with every day? You see that on an article about how to spot someone who's not mentally ill, and you know that there are people out there reading that it's something that's circulated quite widely, that don't know anything about mental illness. That's going to be what they read and that's how they're going to form their opinion. It's horrible. I don't know how many people actually do fake their mental illness. I would hazard a guess at saying it's very few because of the stigma surrounding mental health issues. I mean, since I started talking about being mentally ill openly, I've had a lot of support from people within that community itself, but from outside that there's been a hell of a lot of hatred to deal with, which can be very uncomfortable. It's very hard to deal with sometimes. I don't think many people would have the stomach to sort of put themselves through that. And also, an interesting bit of trivia for you is that actually faking mental illness can actually be a sign of mental illness itself. Point number two, but I knew a faker once. Did you though? How do you know that that person was a faker? How do you have concrete evidence of that? Unless that person actually came to you as a friend and said, hey friend, I'm pretending to have a mental illness here for the lols, then how on earth do you know that? I think it's very dangerous to be judging. You're not in that person's head. I think it's ever so dangerous to be judging if you think someone's faking or not. I mean, maybe there are some people out there who genuinely know people who've said, I'm faking a mental illness, it's so fun, in which case that's bad. Again, what I said in my last point, sometimes that can actually be a sign of mental illness itself. But often when people say they knew someone who was a faker, it worries me because when you actually ask them about it, it seems that they're actually trying to put them up against this checklist of what they think a mentally ill person should be and the signs they should show, and actually it's incredibly harmful, it's incredibly ableist, and it makes me really sad because I hear about people saying this, and I've spoken to people who say this, and it actually, from my perspective, sounds like their friend wasn't faking, their friend just wasn't being a good mentally ill person and being the sort of mentally ill person that they show on TV, you know? Sometimes they would do things that were a bit erratic, and sometimes when they were depressed they would smile, and therefore their friend would think, oh, they're faking, when really mental illness is like that. It can be very up and very down, so that upset me a lot. Also, I want to say that I don't think it's our place to judge if someone's faking or not. I don't think that we can get into someone else's head, and I think unless we are a doctor or a psychologist, I really don't think it's up to us to judge that person. I don't think that we should be spending our time trying to figure out if they're acting correctly mentally ill. I don't understand why people put time and energy into doing that. Personally, I just don't get it. If my friend came to me with mental illness issues, the first thing I'm going to do is not get out my checklist and try and interrogate them to see if they're being honest or not. I'm going to try and offer my support if I can. I don't understand people who do that. Maybe that's just me, I just don't see that as something which is good. Also, this atmosphere of judging those that are mentally ill and kind of, in a way, making them pass a sort of unspoken test to be taken seriously is dangerous, because it means that those people who feel like there's something wrong and they desperately want to get help, they might feel like they can't do it because they're afraid of going through that interrogation. They're thinking it's going to be too much trouble. They feel like they're going to be hated. Their friends are going to turn on them. It's a very unpleasant feeling to be in, and I know that because I went through the stage before my diagnosis when I wasn't sure what was wrong with me, and it leads to self-hatred and self-blame and doubt, and sometimes it can lead to suicide. It can be that serious because a person feels like they can't get help, that people are going to turn against them, that they don't want to be weak, they don't want to be one of those special snowflakes. It's incredibly dangerous, and I just think even if you think that someone around you is faking, it's not your place to judge, and I think it's far more important that you give them the benefit of the doubt for the sake of all those people that need to come forward and need to get that help. Number 3, and one I've got a lot. Unless you've been diagnosed by a doctor, you're not really mentally ill. This is ridiculous because let me tell you a little bit about my own story, okay? I got diagnosed with, my first diagnosis I had was generalised anxiety disorder, and I think I got that when I was about 16 or 17. But I'd been displaying symptoms of very, very bad anxiety since the age of about 7. I was self-harming at 12. I was considering suicide at 12. I wrote a suicide note at 12. I had a major breakdown. At that point, I wouldn't have thought of myself as mentally ill, and my family wouldn't have thought of me as mentally ill because we hadn't got that diagnosis from a doctor. I wasn't sure what was wrong with me, but it's undeniable that at that point I was showing signs of mental illness, and I was mentally ill at that time. I just didn't realise it yet. You don't go to your doctor as a mentally healthy person and suddenly they look into your soul and say, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you're mentally ill, and then you walk out of the doctor's surgery as a mentally ill person. It doesn't work like that. It usually, well, for me and for others that I've spoken to, often first of all, you don't know what's wrong with you, so you go through potentially years of suffering these issues where you are mentally ill, but you don't have that diagnosis because you don't know what's wrong. You're confused. You're thinking, why can my friends do these things that I can't? And why am I so sad sometimes? And why do I want to hurt myself? Why do I keep thinking about killing myself? It's a hellish place to be. You feel like your own mind's turned against you. There's such stigma against mental illness that in a way you don't want to be mentally ill, so sometimes you can fight it because you think, that's not me, I'm not mentally ill, I'm not weak, I don't want that to be me. And I was like that for a little bit, which is why I talk about this stuff so much, because I think it's so important that people know that it's not weakness and you need to go and get that help. It takes a lot of courage to finally take that step and go to a doctor. If you can go to a doctor at all, because in some places you have to pay to do this. Sometimes your doctor won't be very clued in on mental health issues. I've seen a couple of professionals and it took them a while to diagnose me. It's not because they were bad at what they did, and it's not because I was dishonest with them. It was simply because sometimes it can take a while, sometimes there's lots of criteria, sometimes you can't diagnose someone until they're a certain age, and also you don't have a lot of time with your doctor often, so it's very hard for them to get that idea of you, so it can take a long time. There is a huge time where you are completely mentally ill, you're genuinely mentally ill, but you don't have that diagnosis, it doesn't make you any less mentally ill during that time. So in summary, for me, it took until I was 17 to get that diagnosis, but I was mentally ill before that diagnosis. I didn't become mentally ill with the diagnosis. The diagnosis was a helpful tool for me that not all people even need, but it was helpful for me in terms of trying to get the right help, trying to get the right medication. I did not become mentally ill with that. Also, something I have to say here, because I see so much weird stuff about diagnosis and self-diagnosis online. I was going to make a separate video about this, but I think I'll talk about it here. Some people who aren't mentally ill and who haven't gone through the system have a very weird idea, I find, about what diagnosis from a doctor actually is. It's not this huge, great soul-searching meeting where finally the doctor says, I can see it in your eyes, you are truly mentally ill after all, and you weep for joy at your diagnosis. Really, it's quite disappointing. And for me, it consisted of talking about my symptoms, the doctor looked at a checklist of those symptoms, ticked them off, and was like, yeah, it looks like you've got this disorder or you've got this mental illness, and now I'm going to prescribe you some medication. I don't know why people think that this moment when you get your diagnosis from the doctor changes everything, and like somehow the doctor can see into your soul. It's not that they look at you and can tell, it's that you tell them your symptoms. They look at their symptom book and they figure out what could potentially be wrong with you. It's that. It's not this magical thing. I really feel like people who aren't mentally ill need to understand that about diagnosis, because people who self-diagnose are often mocked, and I think that it's bad to say you have something and you're diagnosed if you haven't been diagnosed, so in terms of lying about your own diagnosis, but you know, there might be reasons why people do that, but I don't think there's any issue with someone saying, I suspect I might be, for example, bipolar, or I suspect I might have depression. People don't just generally come out and say that kind of thing. It's been usually years of painstaking wondering what's wrong, looking and trying to figure out how to get help. This is the first step towards getting help. I considered I might have had anxiety before I was diagnosed. It was my looking into it and realising these were my symptoms which got me the diagnosis, so it works together. Last of all, number 4. This girl is clearly faking, because a real mentally ill person wouldn't draw attention to it. So let me tell you, I spent most of my life trying not to draw attention to it and trying to pretend I was normal and trying to hide these emotional highs and lows, feeling ridiculous, feeling ashamed, being ridiculed sometimes by my peers, having my family disbelieve me when I was young before they really understood. It was very, very difficult. And you know what? The saddest thing is that I felt ashamed of myself. I felt like this was some sort of flaw in me as a person, that this was somehow my fault, that I could just, if I had a positive enough attitude, I could just fight through it. That's not the reality. Sometimes you need that help, and to have a mental illness is not weakness. My life changed when I started to realise, not with diagnosis, but when I started to realise later on that the shame was hurting me so much. It was the shame that was hurting almost as much as the mental illness itself, and I needed to get rid of it, because why should we be ashamed of a mental illness? It is an illness. You can't help having it. It takes such bravery and courage to battle through it. It doesn't make you weak. In fact, I personally think in the society we live in and the stigma, considering the stigma that surrounds mental illness, I think that being able to admit that you have those issues is incredibly strong and brave. So there's no way I'm going to be ashamed of it. The reason I draw attention to it and I talk about it a lot is because I think about myself when I was in that situation, and it's a situation I see people of all ages in, who talk to me in my comment section and sometimes send me messages. And it's just, I sometimes see people that are still in that state of being ashamed and feeling guilty and feeling like a burden and feeling like it's their fault and feeling like, why can't they do these same things as their friends, and feeling like a failure. I know those feelings. This is incredibly, not a nice thing to say, but I know that can lead you to feeling suicidal, because you feel like you're a failure, you feel like you can't cope, and people aren't particularly kind to those with mental illness sometimes. The attitude around it can be so toxic. It kind of blames the sufferer for something that can't possibly be helped. It's an illness like any other. I know that if I didn't have that shame on me and that guilt, and I'd seen more people talking about it, and I'd known that it was okay, that it was just something that was part of me, it didn't have to be all of me and it didn't have to be the end of my life, I feel like I would have had times when I wouldn't have got so low, basically. So that's why I talk about it. And if you don't like people who are mentally ill talking about that, then I'm sorry, but that's your problem. We're not going to stop, because we know from experience that it actually helps people, and that's more important. People being alive is more important to me than what people on the internet think about those that talk about mental illness. Okay, so those were probably the 4 most common counter arguments I have to that video that I made, which you can watch. I'll put the video here if you want to watch it, although you've probably watched it if you're watching this. I hope you enjoyed this. I just want to say that I'm absolutely... It doesn't make me happy that there's so many comments on that video and I've been contacted by so many people about it, because it's sad to think that there are so many people going through such horrible situations. And sometimes it's sad because I see people in situations that I've been in, and I can see people who are maybe a few years behind me in that sort of, not in age, in terms of age, but in terms of where you're at with your mental illness. And some people are still, I can like feel the shame in their words, and it upsets me so much because I was there and I know what that's like. But if you're one of those people that you're at the beginning of a journey, and you will get to a point, I promise you can get to a point where you just think, this is an illness, I'm not ashamed of it. If other people don't like it, who bloody cares? This is me, I'm fighting through it. You have to just try and not care what people think. Okay, anyway, I love you loads, hope you're okay, and I'll see you really soon. Bye!